Welcome back, everybody, to the Megatherium Club podcast. Happy Halloween. Well, by the time you hear this, it won't be Halloween anymore, but yesterday was Halloween here, and so we're kind of treating it as if it's still Halloween because this episode will be spooky themed like it was last year. Honestly, I think this is the best holiday. Did you do anything, Spencer? Anything special for this holiday?
I did. I went to a friend's house just south of Boston for a little Halloween shindig and played some Halloween themed games and had a good time. But I did watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre the other night, the
Oh,
1974 version. Oh, so good.
I
So
haven't seen
good.
any version, but that sounds pretty sick.
Yeah. What about you? What did you do?
Well, we worked pretty late, so we dressed up in some Halloween costumes that we are going to put on later today and carve pumpkins in. But we mostly just ate dinner, got a little drunk, and passed out. So,
Oh,
but today we're gonna
classic.
carve some pumpkins and take some Halloween pics.
Love it. Love it. I hope to get those pics, by the way. I want to see you guys in your cute
I'll
little
send you
costumes.
pics. Yeah.
Perfect.
Well,
Glad you got what I was fishing for.
yeah. Well, I'll start it off today without discussing the specific spooky theme of the day because if I did, it would kind of take away some of the shock value from the organism I want to talk about. I want to take a page from your book, Spencer, and paint our audience a picture. Imagine you're walking through a forest, let's say a forest in China or Malaysia. Now you probably don't know what that looks like, and that's totally fine. Just imagine you're walking through a forest and it's dusk. You're probably heading back to wherever you're staying. Let's call it a lodge, and you're walking through an area that has some fruit bearing trees. You can smell the over ripening fruit as some may have already fallen on the ground and begun to spoil. Insects are buzzing around, have found their way to the nutrient dense fruits, and are lapping up their sweetness. You notice some wasps, some beetles, perhaps, and some unremarkable small moths that you almost don't think twice about. But you remember your cool camp counselor, Spencer, back in the day, telling you how moths are generally pollinators that visit flowers and drink nectar using their proboscis. Now you are a little puzzled because these moths before you are clearly not on a flower, but they have clearly penetrated the fruit with their hollow proboscis, kind of rocking its head side to side, almost drilling their proboscis into the fruit, acquiring nutrients that way. This is odd, you think, and you don't want to waste more time as the sun is setting, and so you return to your lodge, turn in for the night with the window open so you get a slight breeze while you sleep, almost forgetting your weird. So in the middle of the night, you wake up to an odd pain on your leg that is now uncovered from the blanket. You must be a restless sleeper, and now your leg's exposed. But you feel this pain, and you turn on the light and find one of these small and remarkable brown moths attached to you, actually feeding from your leg like you witnessed earlier with the fruit. But instead of juice, this individual is drinking your blood. You try to remove it, but it takes a bit more effort than you would have expected. Eventually, though, it flies away, and you are left with a red sore that lasts a couple hours to a day and nightmare fuel for the rest of your life. You were just bitten by a vampire moth. Yes, these are real, and they fall under the genus Calyptra. Did you know these existed, Spencer?
I feel like no, I don't think I had. I know plenty of moths and butterflies that, are regular moths and butterflies that will gladly lap up animal poop,
Oh, yes, yeah.
but not necessarily blood.
Yeah, this was kind of a new one for me, and when I found it, I was like, yep, that's what we're doing for this spooky theme. These little moths, they're kind of dull brown, almost have like a dead leaf camouflage appearance to them. They're no bigger than 1 to 2 inches when their wings are spread. They share an evolutionary tree with other moths that have developed the ability to pierce and feed on fruit. But our little friends, the vampire moth, have taken this evolutionary trait to a whole new level. Found in parts of Eastern Asia originally, these moths have now been observed in parts of Finland and areas in between. So, kind of spread out throughout Northern Europe and parts of Eastern Europe, Western Asian countries. But it wasn't until the late 90s, I believe, that these moths were observed feeding on humans. And they usually prefer large animals, probably just an easier target for them to land on. I don't think they're very specific. Only the males drink the blood though, which is kind of odd for like the insect world because with mosquitoes it's the females that drink the blood. The males do this for a specific reason or nutrient, and that is salt. This uptake in sodium is transferred to the females during mating and apparently passed on to the offspring to increase their chances of survival. The caterpillars of these moths feed on Thalictrum species, just a type of flowering plant, but these plants, or their host plant, is kind of low in sodium, so this adaptation increases their likelihood of survivorship. These males are really just whichever ones can obtain the most sodium then have the greater chance of passing on their genes, basically. And these adaptations have gone so far as to provide hooks on their proboscis to make it harder to be dislodged from the host while taking a meal, something that is unnecessary when simply feeding on fruit. Good news, though, they supposedly do not pose any risk to humans as far as being a vector of diseases or parasites, but that bite is a bit more painful than a mosquito and can leave an itchy rash for an extended period of time. I thought that was terrifying. I know there's plenty of other things that drink blood, but knowing something that looks as innocent and sweet as a moth can bite and suck your blood is kind of disturbing. But also the fact that, like with mosquitoes, they have like a very finely evolved needle-like mouth appendage, I guess, or mouthpiece that's just like, yeah, it's just like it's just a needle. It just goes in and out. These guys are like drilling into you with a modified like tongue. They're just like, yeah, get in there. And like there's a video of them feeding on fruit, and they're just like rocking their head back and forth, just forcing this thing inside of you. And I can imagine that's why it's more painful, because it's much more invasive and I mean, I don't know if there's another word for it, but gross.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Gross. Yeah, invasive. I've known a few people that have, a legitimate fear of butterflies and moths, and I always tell them why. They're the most inconspicuous, innocent insects. Like, they don't do anything to us. And now I have to tell them that, no, if you go to Europe, Eastern Europe, they're going to be coming for your blood.
Yeah. Careful. Sleep with the windows closed.
Yep. Don't invite them in.
Yeah.
Incredible.
But they are more active at night, kind of like regular vampires. And they don't like the sun. But it seems to be like an evolutionary adaptation that was just waiting for them to take advantage of, where they kind of evolved to take nutrients from fruit, and which is like already a behavior that a lot of lepidopterans are observed doing, where they're basically lapping up nutrients or minerals from various sources, like puddles. I think it's actually called puddling. Is that right? Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Where they like literally gather in puddles.
Yeah. Or dog shit, or your shit, or just random things to get these little micronutrients, I guess. But yeah, without them, they're caterpillars wouldn't survive. So maybe this is them taking advantage of a better source of sodium than the fruit nearby. Or maybe there's a lack of fruit, but there's an abundance of blood, so they jumped on that train, I guess, bandwagon. Join the blood drinkers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of blood drinkers, if you couldn't tell the theme of this episode already, blood drinkers are animals that specialize in drinking bloods. Is an incredibly weird and niche and rare phenomenon. And it makes sense. Like, in a survival setting, you might think, maybe I'll drink some blood. But blood is actually super dangerous for us to eat and consume. In small amounts, it's okay, but it can become very toxic very quickly because of a variety of different things, including too much water intake, which is bad for you, and iron toxicity. So if you have too much iron in your body, like any metal, it's not good for you. And the fact that some animals, like even a moth, said, "You know what? That's the niche. That's the one," is incredible. I'm going to talk about one that a lot of people have probably heard about, and has inspired tons and tons of media. Unlike the moth, which I think definitely needs to get shown more, but the vampire bat. Let me take you through a true story of someone I knew who has had an experience with a vampire bat. I'm not going to name names. I don't think he listens to our podcast because he was my freshman year biology teacher. He traveled to South America in the Amazon where he was just kind of doing a tour around. And at night, they put nets around you so that it keeps the critters off of you. And one of those critters is a vampire bat. And I'll get more specific about how they feed a little bit later. My teacher, a couple days later, was just itchy on his elbow, just itchy. And so he took a look at it, and there was a little cut there that had developed, a little chunk taken out. And he asked his guides, like, what had happened, because it just wasn't right. And they said, well, it looks like you got fed on by a vampire bat. And what he thinks has happened is he had rolled over in his sleep, and his arm had accidentally pushed out and underneath the net that was supposed to keep all these critters out, and he got bit. The reason that this became a bigger story is on his flight home, he likely got an infection in that wound on the airline because, as we know, airlines are just disease capsules. And that infection got into his bone and almost killed him.
Jeez.
He almost lost his arm, but luckily, after like rounds and rounds of antibiotics, they actually were able to treat him. But it was a big deal. So let's talk about what the heck happened and why it's so fascinating. Not necessarily the fact that he was almost taken out because it got infected, but just how cool it is to maybe experience being, a meal for something like that. So vampire bats, they all belong to the subfamily Desmodontinae. As we are all aware at this point, Sean and I suck at pronouncing our scientific
And
names.
it continues.
And it always will. That'll never change. There are three genres. There are three species that all belong to different genres. The most popular one is the common vampire bat, Desmodius rotundus. Ironically, there are a lot of there are a lot of bats that have vampire in either their genus or their species names, but none of them are actually vampire bats. All three of the vampire bats don't have a single scientific name alluding to some sort of vampire. They're just named after teeth, essentially. That's where Desmodius comes. They all live in Central and South America. And obviously they all feed on blood, mainly as their primary source of food. Now, their evolution comes, like I said earlier, feeding exclusively on blood is really dangerous because of too much water, too much protein, too much iron. And so I think their evolution to kind of deal with this is pretty fascinating. There's a couple different ideas of maybe where they came from, but most recent things suggest that vampire bats evolved around 26 million years ago initially from insectivorous bats. The idea that they maybe came from fruit bats and they were just feeding on fruits and then started feeding on animals is iffy, but likely some of the ideas is that maybe they were feeding on insects that were attracted to open wounds on animals. And so they would fly to these open wounds, and then, like the red-billed oxpecker, evolved from eating those insects to also eating the blood that was seeping from these wounds, and then developed ways that they could actually create these wounds themselves. So when a vampire bat is flying around, they come around and they will find like the moths, preferably a larger mammal, like a pig or cattle or something like that. And they can actually listen for the regular breathing of these sleeping animals because they're flying around only at night. They'll land, and inside their noses, and they specifically belong to a group of bats that are called the leaf-nosed bats, because their noses are super complex looking and have lots of folds and stuff like that, in order to increase the surface area so that when they can essentially take in air, what they're doing is they'll land next to something and they'll start to sniff around. And what they're doing is not necessarily smelling for blood, but they have lots of specialized thermoreceptors in their noses. So we as humans, we have thermoreceptors that tell us when something is way too hot, right? Like we can hold our hand up above a stove and we can say, yep, that's hot. Their thermoreceptors, I guess, have been evolved to sense temperatures at a lower degree threshold. So they can essentially smell, in a way, where the blood is closest to the skin. And the only other animals, specifically vertebrates, that can do this are some snakes. And that in itself is pretty incredible, I think. So they'll sniff around and they'll actually find the warm spots on the body. And they have specialized incisors, not their canines, but their incisors. And they will make a small cut. And their saliva, it acts as an anticoagulant, so it keeps the blood from coagulating and chunking up and sealing off the wound, so that the wound can flow freely for as long as the bat wants to feed. So they'll sneak up, they'll fly around, and unlike other bats, vampire bats can actually walk around. They can run and they can jump. Other bats cannot do this. Bats are really bad at walking. Just in general, most of them fly around, and maybe if you're a fruit-eating bat, you might land on a fruit, but you're not walking around the fruit. You're just landing on it and taking a chunk. Whereas bats, they fly in, they slowly creep up, and then they walk over there. And they will make that cut, start feeding. They don't suck like a vampire does, but they allow the blood to come out, and then they lap it up with their tongue. And this is where it gets quite interesting, is that they're taking on about 2 times as much weight as their body is. So if you can imagine eating, close to 300 pounds in a single meal, that's a lot of food. But they don't keep it all right away. So essentially their stomach and their small intestine immediately starts taking up water from the blood. And I'm saying immediately. So they'll take that water from the blood and it gets absorbed into their own blood and is brought then to the kidneys. Within 2 minutes of feeding, they're already peeing out most of the water from that blood. So what's left over is just the other components of the blood, the cells and the proteins and stuff like that. So that way they don't have to carry around all that water and their body doesn't essentially swell up. So they'll pee it out, but they still have a lot of stuff in there, and they will actually essentially leap and jump up into the air to actually get themselves flying back. And they'll fly back to their colony, because all vampire bats live in colonies from single digits up to hundreds. And they will nest in caves, trees, buildings, wherever they can find dark, secluded places to hide during the day. And they'll go back, they'll digest, and their body, specifically their gut biome, is what makes it so they can handle the amount of protein and iron in their body. So their gut biome will do a lot of the work for them, and then they'll essentially absorb the rest at non-toxic levels. And they'll poop out the rest, and life continues. Now, vampire bats are social creatures. They live in potentially pretty large colonies, But if you can imagine, you're a really small bat. The Amazon is quite big, right? You might not find a meal every single day, and they don't. So you fly back and you haven't eaten. You're really, really hungry. And vampire bats are really susceptible to starvation because their bodies don't hold on to energy at all. They don't really form fat stores. So you can only go a few days without eating. So you fly back and you're hungry, your tummy's growling, and you start kind of poking around at your neighbors and you say, okay, well, I haven't eaten in a few days. Mind helping me out? And bats within the same colony will regurgitate a portion of their meal to give to other bats within the colonies. And this is to ensure survival of the entire colony, because colonies are made up of a hierarchical system, mostly of females and their offspring, with a few mating males that kind of stick around. There are a few other males that kind of come in and out, but it's mostly females, and a lot of them are related in some sort of way. So they're essentially, by working together, they're ensuring that their genes are better passed on to the next generation. And if that means sacrificing a portion of your meal from the night, then so be it. Now, this, altruism isn't necessarily entirely altruistic, because if you are mooching off of the work of others for too long, you can actually get kicked out of the colony for this. So if you don't essentially, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? And go out and get yourself a meal and you keep mooching, they're just going to say, get out of here, because they don't want you bothering them any longer. And when you do, mooch off of someone else's meal, they expect that if maybe the next time that they don't get a meal, that you have food for them. So it's this whole pretty complex social system they have developed in order to make sure that the colony itself is surviving. So kind of fun. I wanted to quickly touch on where their name comes from, the vampire bat. So Europe was having vampire problems for a few centuries until the discovery of these vampire bats. And I say vampire problem, and I just mean people thought people were rising from the dead and drinking the blood of the people of the living and infecting them with this thing called consumption, which now we call tuberculosis. And there was fear and and dread throughout Europe for a very long time about this, so much so that they would dig up bodies, they would chop heads off, they would burn bodies, they would drive stakes through their mouths, just to make sure that no one was rising from the grave to drink the blood of the living. And all of a sudden, you have this word of this bat in Central America that solely lives on blood. And word spread quickly through Europe that there was this thing called a bat that solely lived on blood, and the name quickly evolved into vampire bat. And Bram Stoker, who is famous in Gothic literature for writing Dracula, would take this kind of hype around vampire bats and incorporate it into his story and have Dracula turn into a creature of the night, being a vampire bat. Now, there are no vampire bats in Europe that people are aware of. It may have been appropriate, I guess, at this point in the show to discuss maybe Bram Stoker should have had Dracula turn into a vampire moth instead of a vampire bat. Missed opportunity there by old Stoker, but that's okay. Vampire bats are still pretty cool too. That's what I have on the vampire bat. I think they're really cool.
Do they transmit any diseases?
That's a good question. So no, they don't transmit too many known diseases. Like you can, there is fear of rabies and stuff like that, just like any bat species.
Yeah. That's still pretty low on the statistic scale, right? Like less than 1% or something.
Yeah, it's pretty low. Now, it's not unheard of, and because they might attack animals more frequently than those animals can get rabies, that might inflate some of that as well. Rabies is pretty rare just in general. And bats that are infected with rabies have a really hard time actually flying around,
Yeah.
finding something, biting it, feeding from it, and passing along that thing. Not that it's impossible, but it's
It's
pretty rare.
uncommon.
Now, if you do get bit by any bat, it is advised, yes, you have to go to the hospital and get a rabies vaccination to keep you from getting rabies, because if you get rabies, you die. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But
I think in
other than that, not really. There's actually more of a concern of bats picking up bloodborne diseases from their meals. But again, their gut biome takes care of pretty much anything that might come into contact with. So
in North Carolina, when we got our wildlife control agent licenses during the class, they talked about rabies and all the animals that get brought in to be tested if they have rabies, and bats are the number one thing that gets brought in, but the least likely to have rabies. So
right.
like per the amount of bats that get brought in, it was like less than a third of them actually have rabies that get brought in. So this is like
Right.
an odd pool compared to like what's out there in the wild. And these are ones that people are like coming to contact with or have found their way into like the living space of a home, but which is like really, it's not uncommon here in North Carolina. But the most popular animal, or the highest, or statistically the most common animal that gets brought in that actually does have rabies in North Carolina is skunks.
Skunks.
And that's
Yeah.
mostly because if you're coming into contact with a skunk, like if a skunk's out during the day, then something's probably wrong, and
Yeah.
it's more likely that animal has rabies. But yeah, it was kind of interesting to read that. Now raccoons was somewhere in between bats and skunks, because I think there's like a strain of raccoon rabies that's like on the rise in eastern US. But yeah, so watch out if it's daytime, you see a skunk. For multiple reasons, do not go near it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just stay away from.
Stay away from everything, I guess. Don't go near raccoons. Don't go near bats. But
Yep.
yeah, I actually was face to face with a skunk the other day. That was my first time being that close to one.
Oh, incredible!
It was so
They are
cute.
cute.
Yep.
Oh my god. Yep. They're just Mephitis.
But there's one more animal I wanted to briefly talk about, and it's right on the same topic. Blood drinkers actually has the same common first half of its name, the vampire groundfinch, and this is just like the other finches Charles Darwin wrote about. It is found in the Galapagos, and it's actually endemic to two islands, specifically the Wolf and Darwin Islands. And as the name suggests, it feeds off the blood of other animals, specifically and almost exclusively blue-footed boobies, but it'll also feed off of Nazca birds as well, when resources are scarce, though. So they are omnivorous, and they feed on invertebrates, they feed on eggs, they'll even scavenge leftover kills, like dead fish. So they're really opportunistic, and their adaptation likely rose from cleaning parasites off of these blue-footed boobies, and they probably had some commensalism relationship with boobies where they'd climb on them, not fly around them, but like basically just remove the parasites, and then maybe that came with some blood, and then their beak started to cause the bleeding, and they realized, hey, this is actually a more easily accessible resource than looking for just the parasites.
Right.
And this is just another cool example where they already had the capability or adaptation. They just kind of needed that push or a reason to evolve, kind of like the moths, where they were already prepared to drink liquid from fruits. They just used their tool to penetrate something else. Skin. But ironically, these birds are now being threatened by an introduced parasitic fly called the avian vampire fly,
Oh,
which
jeez.
is like could do a number on chicks. I think it's kind of like a bot
Hmm.
fly, but
Yeah.
which is now causing the vampire groundfinch to evolve and real time, where if the mothers or the parents are more attentive to their chicks, then they have a higher success rate as they can clean these parasites off and kind of prevent these infections from doing too much harm to the chicks. And so the ones
Yeah.
that are less attentive are being kind of kicked out of the gene pool, if you will. And you're talking about the gut microbiota, so I won't go into great detail on that. But their biome or their gut microbiota is very similar to that of vampire bats and other predatory birds, rather than all the other finches on these islands, because well they're consuming something different, and it
Right.
just helps aid them in the breakdown of the blood. It's kind of interesting.
Too
There's
many.
these two different populations. They each have their own like song. They're different songs. So I don't think you could like take one of them and move it to the other island, and it wouldn't be successful at finding a mate.
Huh.
And so they're
That's
already like
crazy.
geographically separating into almost multiple species, and these are just little black finches. But it's just like Darwin's, like his theory of evolution and all these finches, and they've evolved to on these islands for all these specific niches. This is a great one, and it's kind of evolving in front of our eyes with these two separate populations differentiating themselves. Now they have like an introduced stressor that's kind of pushing the population in a direction if it's going to survive. And I don't know, it's blood consumption is a really cool evolutionary adaptation as well, and it's cool to see how it presents itself.
Yeah. And I have one short one to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Indirect. Now, this is something that I came across kind of on accident. A little surprise to me. I wasn't planning on picking this as my half of one for the day, but I couldn't. It was just way too cool. So in Congo and Nigeria, there are lots and lots of mosquitoes, as I don't know, as there are everywhere in the world, pretty much, uh, including now Iceland. I don't know if you read that, but Iceland now has
I did not know that.
mosquitoes. Yeah, they found breeding, like they found mosquitoes in Iceland for the first time like this past summer,
Damn it.
which sucks so much for Iceland. They had everything going for them, and now they're just doomed. Anyway, so mosquitoes. And I'm not here to talk about mosquitoes. We all know that they are the worst of the worst bloodsuckers, and specifically because there's a lot of them, and a lot of them carry diseases. And specifically in this area, malaria is the one that you really want to watch out for. But because there are so many mosquitoes, and there are so many things for them to bite and to fill up on blood with, of course there would become a niche market for them as prey items. And there's this species, Eva archa culixivora. Ugh. It is
Nice job.
a species of jumping spider, and they are very, very small. They are kind of around 5 millimeters in length, so they're not big, but they're perfectly big to have mosquitoes as their main prey item. And what they do is they specifically search for female mosquitoes who have recently blood fed to hunt down. And like all jumping spiders, they kind of walk around waiting, looking. They have really, really good eyesight, looking for prey items. And so they'll go to where the mosquitoes are at, and they'll essentially smell out mosquitoes that have recently had a blood meal. which is quite interesting because it's the idea of these guys smelling out the meal that was eaten by their prey item is probably unique to them in the animal kingdom. They're not searching out for their prey item, they're searching out for what they ate, right? Which is kind of crazy. And yeah, they'll jump onto those mosquitoes and feed on those mosquitoes, and in part feeding on the blood that is within those mosquitoes. So they are considered blood eaters, but they do it in an indirect way through their actual prey items that have recently fled on blood or fed on blood. Thank you. Yeah, crazy, right?
Yeah, that's
So, yeah.
just seeks out the mosquitoes that have
Yeah.
fed. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
jumping spiders are
And the,
crazy.
oh, I freaking love them. It's so cool. Oh my god. They're the cats of the spider world. They're so smart,
So were
so
these
independent.
introduced to Iceland as well, or
I would assume that they're going to. They're probably going to take these guys and be like, see all these mosquitoes? Let's get rid of
go
them
get them?
before we have a problem. Yeah, and people would probably rather have jumping spiders around them than mosquitoes. I know I would. So
Yeah. I wonder
yeah,
if they'll release like sterile males to help reduce some.
I would assume that the government is like in a full blown like
Yeah.
we need to come up with plans A through Z in order to get rid of these mosquitoes.
Yeah. Huh. Well, there you have it. Blood feeders.
Blood feeders. Happy Halloween.
Yeah. If you have any other
Anything
ideas,
else?
please contact us and we'll make an episode about it.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. And yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. How?
How?